There are moments in life you don't see coming, moments that quietly twist your ordinary day into something extraordinary. For Amara Johnson, that moment arrived in the form of a magazine cover. She was just another photographer, busy capturing candid smiles at a high-profile gala, never imagining that one of her own portraits would turn into a spotlight she couldn't escape. Her image, poised, confident, radiant, stared back at her from the glossy pages of an exclusive magazine. She barely recognized herself. Meanwhile, across the city, Joon Park, a man whose name carried both power and fear in equal measure, skimmed through the same publication. As a Mafia boss, he was used to commanding rooms, controlling deals, and orchestrating events with precision. Love, marriage, emotions, these were things he considered irrelevant. Until he saw her. That single photograph held a spark, something raw and magnetic that unsettled him in a way he hadn't expected. There was no ignoring it. He didn't want a wife, he never had, but this was different. The next morning, his order was clear: bring her to me. It was simple, commanding, yet decisive. A sentence that would change the trajectory of both their lives. And yet, Amara remained blissfully unaware. She went about her day, juggling deadlines and editing photos, unaware that someone powerful and dangerous had just placed her at the center of his world. It was the beginning of a story neither of them could have anticipated, a story that would challenge their worlds, test their hearts, and ultimately ask them to trust in something neither had ever sought: love. Amara Johnson had always believed that confidence could shield her from anything. She had faced demanding clients, late-night shoots, and unpredictable city life, but nothing had prepared her for the day she walked into Joon Park's world. The limousine doors opened, and she stepped into an estate that shimmered with wealth and silent authority. Every detail, the polished marble floors, the towering windows, the subtle security presence, spoke of power. And then there he was. Joon Park didn't rush toward her, didn't smile or soften his gaze. He simply watched. His presence filled the room in a way that made Amara aware of her own heartbeat, quickening with both curiosity and caution. She was tall, poised, unyielding in her stance, refusing to let the situation intimidate her. But inside, a quiet storm of nerves swirled. He didn't need words to communicate dominance. It was in the way he carried himself, a quiet force that demanded attention without demanding submission. He broke the silence finally, his voice smooth, low, deliberate. "Amara Johnson," he said, almost tasting her name. "You've captured more than images in your photographs. You've captured attention." She raised an eyebrow, unwilling to play the role of someone intimidated. "I capture moments. That's my job," she replied evenly. There was no fear in her tone, only a quiet defiance that fascinated him. A subtle tension hung in the air, a collision of two very different worlds. He had power, influence, and control. She had independence, talent, and a spark that refused to be tamed. And somewhere in that collision, a seed of curiosity took root, a curiosity neither could ignore. For the first time, Joon Park realized that perhaps this encounter wasn't about control. Perhaps it was about something far rarer: connection. And for Amara, the challenge of understanding him, of seeing beyond the walls of his reputation, had only just begun. Days passed, yet Amara couldn't shake the memory of Joon Park's gaze. There was something about the way he observed people, the way he seemed to understand more than he let on, that both unnerved and intrigued her. When he requested her presence again, this time under the pretext of reviewing her photographs, she felt a mixture of curiosity and caution. She was stepping further into a world that demanded obedience, yet she refused to lose herself. Joon had never invited someone into his inner circle so willingly, or so willingly resisted. Her presence was different from the flattery and fear he usually commanded. Amara spoke honestly, challenged his opinions, and yet offered insights that he hadn't considered. A painting, a lighting choice, a detail in one of her portraits, each comment revealed a mind sharp and fearless. For the first time, Joon realized he didn't need to impress her. He needed to understand her. One quiet moment lingered between them as he reviewed a photograph she had taken at the gala. She noticed his tension, the rare crease at the corner of his eyes, and without thinking, stepped forward. "It's okay," she said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. He tensed instinctively, but then relaxed slightly under her touch. She hugged him briefly, a comforting gesture, yet long enough to leave him unsettled. It was innocent, yet intimate, a fleeting connection that neither had expected. When they pulled apart, Joon's expression softened, just slightly, as if the hug had allowed a crack in his armor. Amara, sensing the change, smiled faintly, her heart quietly acknowledging the complexity of the man before her. They were no longer just two strangers in a room. A tentative connection had begun, a bond that might one day carry them beyond the worlds they knew. Amara had always believed that life's beauty was in the small details, a smile, a fleeting gesture, a quiet moment. But stepping into Joon Park's world revealed a complexity she hadn't anticipated. His estate, his city, even his business dealings moved with a precision and intensity that left her both awed and cautious. Danger seemed to hum in the background, subtle but unmistakable, yet she refused to let fear dictate her presence. Joon, for his part, was equally fascinated by her world. He accompanied her to a photography exhibit where she was showing her work, silently observing as she interacted with other artists and patrons. Her laughter was unrestrained, her insight respected, and her passion undeniable. He saw a side of her that didn't exist in his controlled, calculated life, a side that made him both envious and drawn to her. The contrast between their worlds was striking. Joon moved with authority, every step measured, every gesture precise. Amara moved with freedom, fluid and alive, embracing life as it came. And yet, the more they observed each other, the more they recognized a mutual respect taking root. She admired his decisiveness, he admired her courage. A quiet evening found them alone in the estate's library, the city lights casting a warm glow through the tall windows. They spoke about family, childhood dreams, and the expectations that had shaped them. Joon listened as Amara described her journey as a photographer, the moments she chased and the stories she wished to tell. In turn, he shared glimpses of the man behind the reputation, the boy who had learned too quickly that power could be both a gift and a burden. At the end of the evening, a simple hug, a lingering, reassuring embrace, spoke more than words ever could. It was a quiet acknowledgement. Their worlds were different, but perhaps together they could create something new. Even the strongest walls can crack when faced with genuine vulnerability. That evening, Joon Park stood in his study, tense and unusually quiet. The weight of his responsibilities pressed down on him, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the strain. Amara, who had accompanied him under the pretext of reviewing photographs, noticed the subtle tension, the tight line of his jaw, the shadow in his eyes. Without thinking, she stepped closer. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she said softly, her voice calm but firm. The sincerity in her words made him pause. No one had ever offered him comfort without an expectation, without a hint of fear or obligation. He opened his mouth to respond, but words failed him. Instinctively, Amara reached out and hugged him. It was simple, quiet, and gentle, but it carried a depth that neither of them had anticipated. He stiffened at first, surprised by the warmth and closeness, but then he allowed himself to relax into the embrace. For a fleeting moment, the world outside the study ceased to exist. There were no deals, no commands, no expectations. Only the two of them, grounded in a moment of connection that spoke louder than words ever could. When they finally pulled apart, Joon's gaze lingered on her. He had always believed that power was his defining trait, but now he realized that vulnerability could be just as potent. Amara smiled faintly, sensing the change in him. That hug, brief as it was, had shifted something unspoken between them. A bond was forming, not of obligation but of trust and quiet understanding. From that evening forward, they both sensed it. Their connection was no longer tentative. It had taken root, and neither could ignore its pull. Amara thought she understood Joon Park, but the more she learned about his world, the more uncertain she became. Rumors of his Mafia influence, whispered in the city streets and carried in news reports, began to reach her. She worried, not for herself but for the life she had fought so hard to maintain. Independence and freedom were non-negotiable for her, and she feared being swept into a world she couldn't control. Joon noticed the subtle change in her demeanor. She was still polite, still attentive, but a distance had grown where connection once had flourished. He struggled to reconcile his desire to protect her with the risk of pushing her away entirely. For the first time, he realized that power alone could not secure love. It could only intimidate. Their conversations grew shorter, and moments of laughter became fleeting. Amara avoided visiting the estate, citing work obligations. Joon, frustrated but unwilling to corner her, tried to communicate, but every attempt seemed to widen the gap. He had never faced a challenge like this. Someone who refused to be impressed or intimidated by his authority. It was both maddening and magnetic. Late one evening, Amara paused in her apartment, reflecting on their time together. She remembered the brief, comforting hug in the library, the warmth of connection that had made her heart beat faster. Yet the fear lingered. Could she truly be a part of a life shadowed by danger? Could she trust a man whose world seemed so impossible to enter? Joon, watching the city lights from his estate, understood her hesitation. He had walls of his own, but he also recognized the risk of losing her entirely. Somewhere between pride and longing, he made a silent vow. He would prove to her that their connection was real, and that distance, no matter how great, could never sever what they were beginning to build. The tension between them had stretched for days, silent but heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Amara couldn't ignore the pull she still felt toward Joon Park, no matter how much she feared his world. She told herself it was curiosity or perhaps fascination, but deep down it was more. She missed the quiet moments, the rare glimpses of warmth behind his commanding presence. Joon understood the unspoken distance better than anyone. He had tried words, gestures, even subtle attempts at connection, yet nothing bridged the space she had put between them. Finally, he decided to act, not with authority, not with orders, but with sincerity. He went to her studio unannounced, finding her sorting photographs with furrowed brows and a distracted expression. "Amara," he said softly, keeping his voice low, careful not to startle her. "I came because I need to apologize. For everything, the pressure, the assumptions, the walls I built around you before I even knew you." Amara looked up, startled by the rare vulnerability in his tone. She saw the man behind the reputation, the one who wasn't just Joon Park the Mafia boss, but Joon Park who could care deeply without expectation. Without thinking, she stood and hugged him. It was a long, gentle embrace, filled with relief and forgiveness. In that moment, the tension melted, replaced by a quiet understanding. They pulled back slightly, still close, both breathing a little easier. Amara smiled, and Joon returned the gesture, a subtle acknowledgement that they were trying again, together. The walls between them hadn't fully disappeared, but cracks had formed, enough to let trust and connection seep in. For the first time in days they felt aligned, their hearts moving toward the same rhythm. The distance was closing, slowly, and both knew the path forward would require patience, honesty, and above all, mutual respect. It was a cool evening when Joon Park suggested they step outside the walls of the estate. Amara hesitated, unsure if she wanted to leave the safety of her world, yet something in his tone, gentle, not commanding, persuaded her. They walked through the city streets, the lights reflecting off wet pavement, the hum of life around them creating a quiet intimacy that neither had expected. For once, there were no business dealings, no obligations, no unspoken pressures, just two people sharing a moment. They talked about everything and nothing, childhood dreams, favorite places, the little habits that made them who they were. Amara laughed at Joon's unexpected sense of humor, the subtle quirks that few ever saw. Joon found himself marveling at her curiosity, the way she observed the world and drew meaning from small details he had long ignored. As they strolled through a quiet park, Amara stopped at a bench, looking out at the shimmering water. Joon stood beside her, silent for a moment, simply enjoying the peace of being near her. Without warning, she leaned into him, and he instinctively wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The hug was warm, comforting, and grounding, a perfect blend of tenderness and trust. They lingered there, a shared warmth that spoke volumes without a single word. In that hug, they acknowledged what had been building quietly between them. A connection rooted not in power or obligation, but in mutual respect, understanding, and a growing affection that neither could deny. As the evening drew to a close, they walked back to the estate, hearts a little lighter, minds a little calmer, and a subtle spark ignited. A quiet promise that this was only the beginning of something deeper. Amara's nerves were taut as she approached Joon Park's family estate. Meeting someone's family was always a delicate step, but meeting the family of a man like Joon carried its own weight. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that he had chosen to show this side of his life to her, and that meant trust. Joon walked beside her, quiet but supportive. "They'll like you," he said almost casually, though she caught the sincerity in his voice. His rare display of reassurance made her heart beat a little faster. Inside, she was greeted with warmth and subtle curiosity. His parents' polite smiles, his siblings' quiet nods. They didn't see her as an outsider. They saw someone Joon cared for. Each interaction was simple, yet meaningful. Amara laughed, relaxed, and slowly felt the tension in her shoulders ease. She realized that the man who had seemed so unapproachable had created a life where family and loyalty mattered deeply, and now she was becoming a part of that world. Later, alone in the garden, Joon pulled her close, the city lights casting a gentle glow around them. There was no rush, no expectation, just presence. "I want you in my life, Amara," he said softly. "Not as a guest, not as a visitor, but truly always." Amara's heart swelled and she hugged him tightly, feeling the strength and sincerity behind his words. This was a hug that carried a promise of protection, of partnership, and of love that went beyond fear or obligation. In that quiet moment they understood each other fully. Their worlds, once so separate, were slowly intertwining. And for the first time both felt the possibility of a future, not just together but forever. The estate was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of evening lights. Amara Johnson and Joon Park stood together, side by side, reflecting on a journey that had begun with a single photograph and a command that seemed impossible to ignore. They had navigated tension, misunderstandings, and the weight of two very different worlds, and yet here they were, closer than ever. Amara smiled as Joon reached for her hand. It was a simple gesture, yet it spoke volumes. Trust, commitment, and the quiet comfort of knowing they had found something rare and enduring. For Joon, it was the first time he had allowed himself to imagine a life beyond control, power, and business. A life shaped instead by love, care, and partnership. They celebrated that evening surrounded by friends and family, small yet meaningful moments that cemented their bond. Laughter filled the rooms, heartfelt conversations flowed freely, and Amara realized that she was not just accepted but cherished. Joon's world, once daunting and formidable, had become a space where love could thrive. Later, alone in their shared sanctuary, Joon pulled Amara close. The hug was long, tender, and unhurried, a reflection of everything they had endured and everything they had built together. It was more than comfort, it was a declaration, a silent promise of forever. Amara rested her head against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, a rhythm that had become her anchor. In that embrace, they knew they had found their place in each other's worlds. No longer strangers, no longer bound by fear or caution. They were partners, friends, and lovers in the truest sense. The story that began with a photograph had blossomed into a love story that would endure, strong and unwavering for the rest of their lives.